The envelope was sitting on my kitchen counter when I got home from work. It was the kind I never open with urgency, a property tax notice, the ones I usually toss on the stack by the coffee maker and deal with on a Saturday morning. But something made me pick it up that Tuesday evening. Maybe it was the way it was addressed. Not to me, to my brother. At my address, I stood there in my scrubs with my bag still on my shoulder and read it again. The name on the envelope was his. The property address was mine. Same zip code. Same house I'd lived in for 11 years. I set my keys down slowly, like the counter had become uncertain ground. I opened it. It was a standard property tax statement for the upcoming quarter. Standard in every way except for the name printed in the owner field at the top of the form. My brother's name? Not mine. Not the name that had been on every tax bill, every insurance document, every piece of mail connected to this house since I finished paying off the mortgage 4 years ago. I read it 3 more times. Then I put it face down on the counter and made dinner. Not because I wasn't panicking, but because I needed 10 minutes where I wasn't. By the time the water was boiling, I had already called the county assessor's office. Closed at 5. I called the property records line. Automated. I typed my home address into the county recorder's public search portal from my phone while the pasta cooked, and when the result loaded, my stomach dropped so hard I gripped the edge of the sink. The recorded owner of my house was my brother. The transfer date was 6 weeks ago. I turned off the stove. I had bought this house myself. Saved for 8 years, worked double shifts at the dental practice, skipped vacations, drove a car with 200,000 miles on it because a reliable mortgage payment mattered more to me than anything that looked like a life. My name was on the deed. My name alone. No co-borrower, no co-owner, no one else's fingerprints on the thing I had built quietly and stubbornly from nothing. And now the county recorder's database said it belonged to my brother. I didn't call him that night. I didn't call my mother either, even though my first instinct, the one trained into me by 38 years of being the peacemaker, told me to pick up the phone and say, "Hey, there's been some kind of mistake." I'd learned enough about my brother's mistakes to know they rarely arrived without help. I didn't sleep. I lay in my house, in my bed, staring at a ceiling that the county's records said belonged to someone else, and I planned. At 8 the next morning, I was standing outside the county recorder's office before the doors unlocked. I had the tax notice, my original deed, my mortgage payoff letter, my photo ID, and a folder of every document I could locate that had my name tied to this property. The woman at the front desk looked at me over her reading glasses and asked how she could help. I slid the tax notice across the counter. Then I slid my ID next to it. I said, "I need to see whatever document transferred ownership of my property, because I did not sign one." Her expression didn't change. She typed. The printer hummed. She slid a document toward me that I had never seen before in my life. It was a quitclaim deed, dated 6 weeks prior. It transferred my house from me to my brother for consideration of $1. The signature at the bottom was supposed to be mine. I stared at it for a long time. The handwriting was close, the way a copy of a copy is close. The loops were right. The slant was approximately correct. But it wasn't mine. It was my name, written by someone who had studied my signature without being me. And below the signature line was a notary seal. The recorder's clerk was watching my face. She'd seen this expression before, I could tell, the specific stillness that comes before something breaks. She leaned in slightly and asked, in a voice low enough to be private, "Did you sign this document?" "No," I said. "I have never seen this document before today." She picked up her phone. The woman who came out of the back office was named Dolores. She had the build of someone who had worked a government desk for 2 decades without losing the ability to be surprised by human behavior. She shook my hand, introduced herself as the head of the recording fraud unit, and looked at the quitclaim deed like it had personally offended her. She walked me to a small conference room, closed the door, and asked me to start from the beginning. I told her about the tax bill, about searching the portal, about the deed. She listened without writing anything down, which told me she was listening in the way that matters. When I finished, she opened her laptop and turned it to face me. "Can you show me your original deed?" she asked. I slid it across the table. She looked at it, looked at the submitted quitclaim, and she did what I later learned all good fraud examiners do. She looked at the notary seal. She went still in a way that reminded me of the moment right before a dentist tells you something is serious. "I know this notary," she said quietly. I waited. She looked at me with the particular expression of someone choosing words carefully. "This notary's commission has come up in our office before," she said. "Not criminally, but a complaint was filed." She closed the laptop and pulled out a legal pad. Now she was writing. I need you to answer some questions for me, she said. And I need you to be precise. Does your brother have access to any of your personal documents? Birth certificate? Social security number? Anything with your signature on file? My stomach went cold and I knew immediately, yes. Because 2 years ago, when my mother had a minor surgery, I'd handed my brother a folder of my documents to help coordinate her insurance paperwork while I was at work. I'd trusted him. He was family and I was at work and my mother needed help, and that was the logic I had used. I told Dolores this. She wrote it down without changing expression. When I left the recorder's office that morning, she had my contact information, a copy of every document I'd brought, and my original deed in hand for comparison. She told me to go to the non-emergency police line and file a report for identity theft and deed fraud. She told me not to contact my brother or my mother. She said those exact words, with the gravity of someone who had watched people dismantle their own cases with a single phone call. I sat in my car in the parking lot for a while. My brother was 42. He had cycled through businesses that never quite launched, loans that were always for a fresh start, and explanations that were always almost convincing. My mother had spent 30 years covering for him with the specific devotion of someone who believes one more chance is always the right answer. I was the daughter who paid her own bills, who didn't ask for things, who could be counted on precisely because I never needed to be. I understood then, sitting in that lot, that my reliability had been its own kind of vulnerability. I was the one with something worth taking. I filed the police report that afternoon. The officer who took my statement was young and thorough. He typed everything I said without editorializing, and when I showed him the deed, he photographed it, photographed the notary seal, and asked me if I knew who had witnessed the signing. I told him the notary's name was printed on the seal. He looked it up on the state database right there in the room. The commission is active, he said. Which means someone used a real notary, I said. He looked up at me. Or someone who has access to a real notary seal. I drove home and started going through my email. If my brother had been working on this for any length of time, there would be a trail. Not because he was careless, but because he believed he was careful, which is worse. Careful people leave fewer accidents. Arrogant people leave signatures. I found it in an email thread from 11 months ago. My mother had forwarded me a link to a mortgage refinancing calculator with a note that just said, "You should look into this. You could pull some equity." At the time, I'd ignored it. I didn't want equity. I wanted a paid-off house. Now I went back and looked at the metadata. The email hadn't originated from my mother's address. It had been forwarded from her account, but the original sender was a mortgage broker I had never heard of. I called the broker's office the next morning. The woman who answered was professional and pulled up my name without hesitation, and then said something that made me sit down. She said, "Oh yes, we've been working with your brother on a refinancing inquiry for this property for about 10 months. I said, "I'm sorry. Say that again." She hesitated. She said, "Your brother contacted us regarding a home equity line of credit on your property. He said he was handling it on your behalf." I asked her to hold on. I asked her what documentation he had provided. She got quiet in the way that means the answer is bad. He had provided a signed letter of authorization with my name on it. He had provided a copy of what appeared to be my ID. He had provided the deed, which at that point had already been fraudulently transferred into his name. My hands were shaking when I hung up. Not because I was afraid, because I understood the full architecture of it now. This wasn't impulsive. This was a plan. Transfer the deed first, establish ownership on paper, then approach lenders with documentation that pointed to him as the legitimate owner. He wasn't just taking my house. He was going to borrow against it, drain whatever equity he could pull from it, and probably let it go into default while I stood outside my own front door wondering what had happened. I called Dolores at the recorder's office. She listened to everything I said without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for 3 seconds, and then she said, "We need to meet today." This time when I came in, there were 2 other people in the conference room. One was a detective from the Economic Crimes Unit named Marcus. The other was a woman from the state attorney's office who introduced herself and said she had been briefed. I sat down and spread my documents on the table, including the mortgage broker's name and the email chain and the timeline I had typed up the night before, because I knew if I didn't organize it myself, I would forget something important under pressure. Marcus read the timeline without looking up. Dolores had pulled the notary's commission history and laid it on the table. The notary's name was a woman I had met exactly once, at my mother's church, 3 years ago. "Is this woman a friend of your mother's?" Marcus asked. I said, "I think so. I've seen her at family events." He wrote something down. Dolores pulled up a document on her laptop that she turned toward us. It was a public records search showing the notary's name on 3 other deed transfers in the past 18 months. 2 were in different counties. One was a property in my mother's name that had been transferred to my brother the year before. So, he's done this before, I said. Not with you, Dolores said carefully. But yes, this appears to be a pattern. The woman from the state attorney's office was taking notes now. She asked me to confirm the chain of custody on my original deed, and I walked her through it step by step. She asked whether I had ever granted power of attorney to anyone. I said no. She asked whether my brother had ever had access to my mail. I thought about it and remembered that for 6 months, when he was between apartments 4 years ago, he had stayed in my guest room. He would have had access to my mail, to documents I left on the counter, to my desk drawer where I kept a file folder of household papers. He had been planning this for at least 4 years. I said that out loud and heard my own voice say it and had to stop for a moment. Marcus looked at me with the first trace of something human. He said, I know this is a lot. Take a minute if you need one. I didn't take a minute. I said, what happens now? He told me he would be applying for a search warrant for my brother's financial records and communications. He said the mortgage broker's documentation would be subpoenaed. He said the notary would be contacted for a formal interview and that her cooperation, or lack of it, would determine what charges she faced. He said the recorder's office would place a fraud flag on my property title, which meant no transaction involving that address could be processed until the matter was resolved. What about the deed transfer? I asked. My brother is still listed as the owner in the system. Dolores spoke first. We're initiating a title reversal, she said. There's a process for fraudulent transfers. Given what we have, your name should be restored within 2 weeks. 2 weeks. My name should be restored to my own house within 2 weeks. I nodded and kept my face steady, because the alternative was to come apart in a government conference room, and I had not come this far to come apart. Before I left, Dolores asked me one more question. Has your brother contacted you at all in the past few weeks? Any reason given? I thought about it. He had texted me twice in the past month, once to say he was thinking of me, once to ask if I was planning to attend a family dinner at my mother's house. Both texts were uncharacteristic. My brother and I were not close in the texting just to think of you way. We were close in the awkward phone calls on holidays way. I showed Marcus the texts. He photographed them. Keeping tabs on the timeline, he said quietly. Making sure you hadn't noticed yet. I went home and I did not call my brother. I did not call my mother. I did exactly what Dolores told me to do, which was to continue living in my house, document anything unusual, and wait. I did not wait quietly. I contacted a real estate attorney that week who reviewed the fraudulent deed, confirmed the forgery based on signature analysis, and filed a civil complaint on my behalf as a parallel action. The attorney told me that deed fraud in my state carried felony charges. She used the word felony the way people use it when they want you to understand the gravity, and also when they want you to stop being polite about what was done to you. 12 days after my first visit to the recorder's office, Marcus called me in the morning before I left for work. He said, We made contact with the notary yesterday. I stood in my kitchen in the same spot where I had opened the tax bill, and I held the phone very still. She gave a full statement, he said. She confirmed that your mother contacted her and asked her to notarize the quitclaim deed. She was told that you had signed it and that you were aware of the transfer. She said your mother told her it was a family financial arrangement and that you simply weren't able to come in person. She notarized a document without the signer present, I said. Yes, Marcus said, which is a violation of her commission and potentially criminal depending on what she knew. She says she didn't know it was fraud. That's for the prosecutors to sort out. I asked about my brother. He said, Your brother was brought in for questioning yesterday afternoon. I sat down. Marcus told me what happened. My brother had come in with a lawyer, which told Marcus he had known this was coming or had suspected it. He denied the forgery initially. He said I had agreed verbally to the transfer. He said our mother could confirm it. Then Marcus showed him the mortgage broker documents, the 10 months of communications about the HELOC, the email trail, and the notary's statement. He showed him the original deed with my signature compared side by side to the quitclaim signature using the forensic examiner's report. My brother had looked at the documents and then looked at his lawyer. His lawyer had said nothing. My brother had asked for a break. After the break, he changed his story. He said our mother had initiated the plan. He said she had told him it was the only way to save his finances and that I would never miss the equity because I never used it anyway. He said she had arranged the notary and the documentation and he had simply signed where she told him to sign. Marcus was quiet for a moment after telling me this. Then he said, Your mother was brought in separately this morning. I put my hand flat on the kitchen table. She denied everything at first. Then we showed her the notary's statement. Then we showed her the email chain. Then we showed her the timeline. What did she say? I asked. She said she was trying to help your brother because nobody else would. I sat with that sentence for a long time. She was trying to help my brother because nobody else would. As if my house were a communal resource she could redirect. As if my name were a signature she could borrow. As if I were the nobody who had been standing there available all along. Marcus told me the district attorney's office was reviewing the case for charges. He said my brother and mother were both looking at felony deed fraud, identity theft, and forgery. He said the notary was facing commission revocation and possible misdemeanor charges for improper notarization. He said the mortgage broker's office had been cooperative and was not implicated but had provided extensive documentation. He said, the title reversal was processed yesterday. Your name has been restored as the sole owner of record on your property. I didn't say anything for a moment. He said, I know that shouldn't have had to happen, but it's been corrected. I thanked him. I don't remember exactly what I said after that. I remember hanging up and sitting in my kitchen for a long time looking at the counter where the tax bill had sat 11 days ago with my brother's name on an envelope addressed to my house. My real estate attorney called me that afternoon with the same news. She also told me she was pursuing the civil case simultaneously, which could result in damages on top of the criminal proceedings. She said the combination of the forged deed, the fraudulent notarization, and the active HELOC application constituted a pattern that courts took seriously. I asked her the question I had been afraid to ask. What would have happened if I hadn't opened that tax bill? She was quiet for half a second. She said, the HELOC application was in late-stage review. If it had been approved, your brother would have received a line of credit secured against your property. Your title would have been encumbered. Depending on whether he defaulted, you could have faced a lien, foreclosure proceedings, or years of legal entanglement to prove the underlying fraud. It would have been significantly harder. Significantly harder. Meaning possible, but the kind of possible that costs more than most people have. I thanked her and hung up and went back to work the next morning because that is what you do. You slide your feet back into the routine and you show up and you do your job and you let the legal process move at its own pace without you pulling at it. 3 weeks later, my brother was formally charged: felony deed fraud, identity theft, and forgery. My mother was charged with 2 counts of identity theft and 1 count of conspiracy. The notary surrendered her commission voluntarily the day before she was scheduled to appear for a formal disciplinary hearing. My brother called me once after the charges were filed. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail that I still have not listened to. I don't think I need to. Whatever he said in that message, it was written for him, not for me. My mother sent a card in the mail. Handwritten, 3 sentences. The sentences said she was sorry I felt hurt, that she had only been trying to keep the family together, and that she hoped I would find it in my heart to understand. She signed it with her name and a small cross. She was sorry I felt hurt, not sorry she forged my name on a legal document, not sorry she arranged to transfer my house to my brother without my knowledge, sorry that I felt something about it. I put the card in my legal file because my attorney said to keep everything. The house is still mine. The title is clean. The fraud flag has been lifted. I had the locks changed anyway, not because anyone had a key, but because the act of it felt necessary. The locksmith came on a Thursday, changed every cylinder in 40 minutes, and handed me a set of fresh keys still warm from the machine. I stood on my own porch and slid the key into the front lock and felt it turn cleanly. Some things you think you're secure in until someone tests the edges. Then the test becomes the evidence of what was always true. That you built something real, and that real things can be defended with paperwork, with timestamps, with audit trails that don't care about family stories. My brother and mother's case is still moving through the court system. That is slow, which is frustrating. But slow means thorough. It means every document, every email, every notarized page with a mismatched signature is being reviewed and cataloged and entered into a record that does not forget. I paid my property taxes last month. My name was on the bill, my name and my address and my house. The small, ordinary fact of it felt more significant than it ever had before. And when I filed it in the folder by the coffee maker, I kept it facing up.